Childbirth is something every culture in history has had to deal with. But the way they've marked that moment, that has changed a lot. Today, we're going to dive into a set of ancient laws that laid out a really specific and pretty surprising ritual for new mothers. Let's see what it can tell us about their world. So let's get right to it. What exactly was a woman supposed to do after having a baby, according to these old religious texts? Well, it turns out the answer wasn't simple at all. It was this whole structured process involving waiting periods, very specific offerings, and then a final purification. Okay, so the very first step in this whole journey begins with this formal idea of a state of uncleanliness. Right after giving birth, a new mother was considered ritually unclean. But what does that actually mean? Because it's probably not what you're thinking. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. The term ceremonially unclean had literally nothing to do with being physically dirty or, bad hygiene. Nope, it was a temporary ritual status. It was a label that just meant you couldn't participate in sacred activities or go into holy places for a little while. It was all about your spiritual and ritual readiness, nothing more. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty, because the rules were actually different depending on whether the baby was a boy or a girl. First up, the timeline for a woman who gave birth to a son. This was a process that took a full 40 days. So this process was really broken into two main parts. For the first 7 days, the mother was considered ceremonially unclean, a status the text actually compares to her normal monthly cycle. Then on day 8, the son was circumcised, which was a huge deal. And after that, a second, much longer phase kicked in, another 33 days for her purification, and during this time she couldn't touch anything sacred. So you add that first 7 days to the next 33, and what do you get? A grand total of 40 days. And that number, 40, pops up all over the place in ancient traditions, right? It often means a time of testing or transformation, and for the mother of a new son, this was her prescribed period. But what about the other scenario? What happened if the baby was a daughter? Well, this is where the law laid out a very different and way longer timeline. For the birth of a daughter, believe it or not, the timelines were exactly doubled. That initial period of uncleanliness lasted for 14 days, a full 2 weeks. And then, after that, the mother had to wait another 66 days to finish her purification. So, that brings the total purification time for the mother of a daughter to a whopping 80 days. Not just a random number, but precisely double the time required for a son. And this chart really just puts it in black and white, doesn't it? This isn't some small difference. The time she was separated from the sacred parts of community life was exactly double if she had a daughter, a full 80 days versus 40. Now, the ancient texts don't spell out why, but you can bet this has been a hot topic of debate for scholars for a very, very long time. Okay, so once this waiting period was finally over, whether it was 40 or 80 days, she wasn't quite done yet. There was one last really important step she had to take to be fully welcomed back into the religious community. She had to bring specific offerings to the priest. The standard, by-the-book requirement had 2 parts. First, she needed a year-old lamb for what's called a burnt offering, which was usually about dedication and worship. And second, she needed a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering, which was all about atonement and purification. Both of these were brought right to the priest at the entrance of the main sanctuary. But this brings up a really practical issue, right? A year-old lamb. That would have been a pretty big expense for a lot of families back then. So does that mean this whole ritual was just for people with money? Well, check this out. The law actually had a built-in provision for exactly this situation. If a woman couldn't afford a lamb, she could bring a second dove or pigeon instead. So the requirement just became 2 birds, one for the burnt offering, one for the sin offering. And this is a really fascinating detail because it made sure that everyone, rich or poor, could fulfill their sacred duty. So, the long wait is over, the offerings are in hand, and that brings us to the final act. This is the big finish, the culmination of the whole thing, and it was all done by the priest. The priest would take her offerings, whether it was the lamb and the bird or the 2 birds, and he would present them to make atonement for her. This was it. This was the essential step that officially switched her ritual status from unclean back to clean. And once that act of atonement was finished, the text gives us this powerful final statement. Her time of separation was officially over. All the requirements had been met. And she was, once again, ceremonially clean, free to rejoin the sacred life of her community. So, when you take a step back from all the details, the days, the animals, the specific rules, what does all of this really mean? I mean, a system this detailed isn't just random. It shows you a worldview where life and holiness and community were all deeply, deeply connected. So, what does a ritual like this, a ritual of separation and then reintegration, tell us about what that society truly valued? It's a huge question and a pretty amazing window into a world so different from our own.